Overthinkers of Reddit, what unlikely scenario actually came true that you were completely prepared for because you're an overthinker? So, when my wife and I were getting married and looking for a place for ceremony, we found this beautiful but quite remote garden. We were signing the contract for the event, and I kept thinking that it was quite remote. So I asked, hey, how much time does it take for the ambulance to get here? Well, I became the laughingstock of both families. My then future mother-in-law, who was present at the meeting, literally fell down from the chair laughing. The wedding organizer remembered it for weeks, telling about it to everyone we met. My dad ended every sentence with, but maybe you need an ambulance for that. And my wife was making siren noises when I was saying something we disagreed on. Every family dinner, all the aunts and uncles were checking if the ambulance was present. You name it, the entire package. Still, I couldn't get rid of this weird feeling. It would have taken over an hour for the ambulance to get there to the garden, and after a few weeks, I ended up paying for a private ambulance to be present at the wedding. Well, fast forward to the ceremony, and as my wife is literally walking down the aisle, at the back of the garden, I see two paramedics running with a stretcher, and my dad squeezing my hand, whispering, "That's none of your damn business, let them take care of it." And what happened was that one of our older guests had a heart attack and almost died at the ceremony, and he was saved by the private ambulance. And ever since then, when my wife tells me I'm overthinking, I just do the siren noise. Story number 2. I am an amateur clarinetist. I've played in the local orchestra and the like. My son was in the high school band, also played clarinet. Prior to a football game, at the warm-up area, he called me as I was about to head to the game, saying that someone in his section had a problem with their instrument. So, did I have a loner? Now, here's the thing about being a clarinet player, is that everyone you know calls you every time they see a cheap plastic clarinet for sale at a garage sale or the like. So, over the years, especially when my son was in junior and senior high, when I saw one of those for $50 or $100, I grabbed it. It didn't happen every day, but at the peak of my collection, I had a couple of better plastic clarinets in addition to the pretty good wooden one my son played, and Lord knows I wouldn't trust anyone with my good clarinets in B, B, and A that I used in the orchestra. So back on track, I grabbed both of these plastic jobs, which actually played okay, and brought them. I pulled the one I thought was better of the two out of the car and gave it to my son's friend. Meanwhile, he says, "Hey, another person ran into a problem," and I got the second clarinet out of the car. And he said, "How many clarinets do you have?" was my son's question, and it was a proud moment. Story number 3. This was at 9 years old. We had driven home and seen the beginning wisps of smoke for the California Cedar fire in 2003. Naturally, I assumed the worst and packed up all of my clothes and spent about an hour making a travel cage for my guinea pigs. I tied their water bottle to the side so they could drink, packed up their food and their favorite furniture just in case. I then spent the next few hours monitoring the fire on the news and out in the distance from our window, periodically asking my parents if we needed to evacuate. At some point in the night, the fire sped up like crazy and was literally on the hillside across the street. I went into my parents' room and said, "The fire is across the street. Are you sure we shouldn't evacuate?" And at this point, we all went crazy grabbing important documents and supplies. As we were about to lock the doors and drive, I realized I forgot my guinea pigs. My parents told me it was too late and I didn't have time to grab them. But when I cried and explained I had them packed up, I was able to grab them and go. The house ended up okay thanks to a neighbor putting out embers before they took, but we were gone long enough that my pigs wouldn't have made it. Story number 40. When I was 11, I always kept approximately 12 to 15 of some combination of pens, pencils, and markers in my pant pocket, just like having options, and never knew what I was going to need to write on. Sometimes got some side-eye from other kids though. So, cut 2. At a weekend camp with a bunch of kids. I'm participating in a sort of scavenger hunt race thing, and at one point, our team hits the task where everyone has to draw or write something. I don't really remember, but there's only 2 pens, and about 10 people per team, and another team just showed up. Well, with 1 pen assigned to each team, it's going slow until you get a pen, everybody gets a pen, and our team screams through the task because we can all write simultaneously, while the other team's left plodding along with their 1 pen. We eventually win. Who's weird now? Edit. For those concerned about cheating, I believe the lack of pens was oversight by the event planners, not a deliberate means of handicapping teams. There were staff members monitoring that particular station and they didn't intervene. Our victory was sanctioned and still stands. Edit number 2. Some people have expressed concern over the possibility of my getting impaled by all these writing utensils. Rest assured that this 100% has happened to me. I have absolutely impaled my legs and fingertips multiple times. It was terrible. So, is 10 to 15 pens and pencils and markers a bit excessive? Absolutely. Do I see where OP's coming from? Yeah, kinda, but maybe, that's what we got shirt pockets for. You're just saying. Or maybe like a thigh strap pouch or something, or a tiny backpack. But I do have to say, on a side note, if I was stupid rich, I would do a pen collection. I don't know what it is. I just like pens, but I don't like them enough to collect them at my current income level. I don't know. They're like, I don't know. If I was rich, I would have a pen collection. I don't know where I'm going with this. Anyway, next story. Story number 5. I've never told anyone this, but when I was in middle school and going through puberty, I used to be terrified of getting a random boner and my fly being down accidentally. Like, I would be up in front of class and then randomly get an erection, and it would just pop out of my fly in front of the whole class. It's making me laugh just typing this out. You know that episode of South Park where Jimmy keeps getting random stiffies? That was basically my life. Usually I would just tuck it in my waistband and wait for the storm to settle, but I still had the huge fear of it popping out of my fly because I forgot to zip it up. So what did I do? I started wearing my boxers backwards, so that even if I forgot to zip up my fly, my schlong wouldn't be exposed. It was a pain to use the urinals, but honestly, I got used to it pretty quickly. Flash forward a couple of months, and I was at the movies with a big gathering of people. It was basically a big group of girls and my group of guy friends. Each guy and girl paired up and made sure to sit next to each other. I was paired with the girl that I had a huge crush on. We shared popcorn and soda, and it was a huge moment for me. Well, briefly into the movie, I got one of those damn random boners, and I quickly but discreetly stood up and did the old waistband tuck. When I sat back down, I could feel it pop out through my zipper. Thankfully, my backwards boxers kept it from saying hello to my date, but I still panicked and had to cover up in a hurry. She noticed, but I think we can all agree that a 6th grade boy's erect chicken hiding under a layer of underwear is better than just sprouting out bare in the middle of a crowded movie theater. Also, she never said anything to her friends about it. Shout out to Stephanie for not mocking me to her friends. Okay, so really quick, I just want to say tucking it into the waistband, there's a term for that. It's called the Texas tuck, okay? If you didn't know, you know now. Spread the word. Or maybe don't. I don't know. Bring it up in conversation in a natural, not weird way, please, I beg of you. Anyway, next story. Story number 6. My boyfriend, who has zero history of seizures, narrowly escaped dying from one because my overthinking led me to break into his house when he didn't answer the phone. My overthinking had begun a few nights prior. He mentioned that he bit his tongue in his sleep and woke up with a bloody pillow and sore mouth, but he had no memory of it happening. That for some reason led my overthinking brain to question, wow, did he have a seizure and not realize it? He has zero history of seizures, and we had been together multiple years. Didn't live together, but spent nights together, and I had never seen a hint of a seizure. But for some reason, that stuck in my mind. Fast forward 2 days later, we usually don't hang out in the morning because he likes to sleep in late. But on this day, we had an appointment to go see a specific dog at the shelter I was thinking of adopting, and he wouldn't answer the phone that morning. I called multiple times before I went to his place, but he never picked up, and I started getting a bad feeling, but quelled the he's having a seizure thought because that clearly was so unlikely. Meanwhile, making an action plan for that very scenario. I got to his house and he wouldn't answer. So in a completely not me crazy girlfriend move, I climbed over his fence. Luckily, his door was unlocked. I found him unconscious and unresponsive, lying on his back with the sticky remnants of foam all around his mouth. I jumped into action. I rolled him on his side to help curb aspiration, put a pillow under his shoulder to keep him in that position, and I called an ambulance. Had I not hopped the fence to get in? Had I not driven over when he didn't pick up the phone? Had we not had plans to meet up hours earlier than we usually did? He would have been dead by lunch. His kidneys were already shutting down by the time he reached the ER. If he had never mentioned biting his tongue in his sleep, I don't think I would have been overthinking at all. No crazy worries about seizures would have pushed me to go over and find him. And it turns out to be a weird brain disease that's bizarrely endemic to New Mexico, kind of cerebral cavernous malformations. Well, several days later, after we got home from the hospital, I got a call from a friend who said the dog, against all odds, was still at the shelter, as in the very dog we were supposed to be seeing that day. I had given up hope on getting her, pushed it out of my priorities while my boyfriend was hospitalized, but they had forgotten to take down my 24-hour hold sign on her cage, so no one inquired about her. She's now our miracle dog and is the sweetest animal I've ever owned. My boyfriend wouldn't be alive today if we hadn't made an appointment to meet her. Story number 7. I found a nickel-sized lump on my 15-month-old daughter's temple. Freaked out, obsessed over it, researched it exhaustively, and concluded it was a dermoid cyst that had worn through the skull. I was told by a pediatrician that it was a bone bruise that would fix itself over the course of 3 to 6 months. No imaging was needed. expected, and I shouldn't make an appointment at the children's hospital because it would resolve on its own. Well, I got an x-ray done anyway, and the radiologist confirmed every one of my suspicions. But the pediatrician still said to wait and see because that's what you do with dermoid cysts, and it was definitely not through the skull, despite what the radiologist said. Well, made an appointment at the hospital anyway, and the surgeon swore up and down that although it was a dermoid cyst, as I had suspected, it would not be through the skull since in all of his years of practice, it never had been. Well, guess what? It was through the skull, and it was pressing on the membranes between the skull and the brain, a hair's breadth away from breaking the membrane or pressing on the brain. A couple more weeks of waiting and my daughter could have had seizures, a brain infection, lasting damage. I overthought it, and now she's a happy, healthy 3-year-old girl. Story number 8. Honestly, this whole pandemic. I have struggled with severe germophobia my whole life, and as a little kid, I found out what a pandemic was and was really scared of the idea of one happening at some point within my lifetime. The more I read up on pandemics and their history as I grew up and lived with that fear, the more likely I came to feel it was. When COVID was just a thing in Wuhan, I had heard it could be transmissible for weeks before it showed any signs and symptoms. And in the modern day of fast, worldwide travel constantly occurring on a massive scale, I right away felt like there's no way this thing won't become an uncontained possible nightmare in no time. I right away started to say that it was going to spread worldwide, be a serious issue, and that people here in the United States wouldn't handle it very well or act reasonably and would panic and buy everything off of the shelves at first and then immediately not take it seriously at all and call you weak if you do take it seriously. Everyone I know laughed at me, rolled their eyes, and told me I'm a crazy germaphobe. And then literally every single last detail of every single thing that's happened here in the US, from how bad it got exactly to the early pandemic buying days, to the politicizing of the virus and the way Trump used that to his advantage, to how long it's been around and how things might start wrapping up and getting back to normal in a bit if we can vaccinate, all happened exactly the way I called it, play by play, like a year and some months ago. So I don't know if I would call everything that's happened unlikely, really, but at the mental level, I've kind of been gearing up for this my whole life in some ways. Story number 9. All the teachers at the middle school that I taught at knew I was a packrat, and one day a kid split his pants and the school counselor came to me and said, "Mr. OP, would you happen to have a pair of sweats or gym pants in your truck?" Yes, I do. So the kid spent the rest of the day in a pair of nylon pants that I had behind my seat. He is lucky because if he didn't fit, he would have spent the rest of the day in a white disposable coverall I had in case I had car trouble in nice clothes. And the icing on the cake? It was a student I really liked who is super helpful to other kids and teachers, so it was nice to do something nice for him. I also carried a Swiss Army brand soft-side briefcase. It was a yard sale find, and stuffed it with each size of battery I could. Well, one day Phil Niekro and 2 Braves players were there for an assembly, and Phil's mic battery was dying. So I sprinted upstairs to my classroom, grabbed a 9-volt from my bag, then basically rolled across the panel and switched out his battery, and got back to the PA, avoiding getting on TV news cameras. Story number 10. A year and a half ago, my wife was doing the Susan G. Komen 3-day walk, and she was staying in a house that was rented. She had just finished day 2, and her body was essentially done at this point. In the middle of the night, she woke up with severe sweating and dizziness. She started vomiting, and by the next day, didn't feel much better. Then I get the call, "Can you come take me to urgent care?" And oh crap, this is my wife we're talking about. Toughest lady I've ever known. Never asks for help for anything. Strong as an ox and about as stubborn as one too. So when she asks me to take her to the doctor or hospital, I'm out the door in seconds. I drive down to the house to get her, and before we leave, I remember she told me she vomited last night. Well, I'd been there the night before to bring our daughter to see her before she fell ill, and I'd played in the sand at the beach with her with some of the beach toys the house had on hand. So I just grabbed a bucket in case she needs to throw up in it. Well, we make it to urgent care without incident, but I brought that damn bucket in either way because I'll be damned if something goes down. And sure enough, she gets the urge to throw up while we're in there. And wouldn't you know it, the bathrooms were both occupied. Bucket to the rescue. I felt like a damn hero. Story number 11. Planned out what I would do if I were ever exiting a freeway and the off-ramp was backed up, and if I saw a car coming at me too fast to stop. Unfortunately for me, my plan's execution was not flawless, so I did get hit, but I prevented the cars in front of me from becoming involved. So, my plan was to steer onto the shoulder. Just before it happened, I could see that I was in my planned situation, so I was waiting for space to open in front so I could keep maneuvering space when I saw the guy coming through the windows of the car behind me. Well, I had a secondary plan. Pulled the brake, turned the tires towards the shoulder, and put both feet on the brake. He came through the SUV behind me, which I got to watch in slow motion through my rear view, and I got hit by both. The SUV pitted to my left, and he came through on my right. I had opened enough space that my car didn't hit anyone, but I broke my finger when I pulled the handbrake and smashed my knee pretty good when I hit the brakes. Apparently, it's the wrong thing to do because all the energy stopped with my car. It's better to go limp and let your car hit the next one, but that hadn't occurred to me. All that stiffness tweaked my back pretty hard when I absorbed all the impact. Also, seems kind of a douche move to save yourself. Story number 12. In college, I was a retail supervisor, and the scheduled cashier, an older gentleman, had been acting off one morning. I kept turning around at my desk to look at him on the security camera because I just had this aching feeling. A few hours in, I saw him swaying while standing, and I just bolted from my office, through the back room, all the way through the store, just in time to catch him as he fell backwards. Then, I also one time went to drunkenly hook up with an acquaintance/friend of mine, and when I ran my hands down his groin area, I felt his lymph nodes were enlarged. So I stopped what we were doing and I asked him about it, and he said, I didn't even notice that. I have been feeling like garbage lately, and I told him he needed to see a doctor like ASAP. And he tried to shrug it off, but I was like, no, seriously. And a few days later, he called me because he was diagnosed with HIV and a large cancerous tumor. I'm blanking on the type, but one that's not known to be common secondary to HIV, and this was all in his pelvis. Edit. About the cashier. He passed a couple of years following this. I didn't work there anymore, but heard about it, and I went to his funeral. Rest in peace, Eric. You were a genuine kind soul and a grade-A smartass who made my job much more pleasant. He was a single father who unfortunately left a teenage son behind. Elijah, if you're reading this, I have tried to track you down several times to check in on you, and I hope you're doing well. Story number 13. I was in an abusive marriage. I had started planning a way to leave, but had an emergency go-right-now bag in case it got really bad. It had spare clothes, a card to a bank account my ex-husband didn't have access to and didn't know I had, some cash, several weeks of my meds, a brief medical history with doctor's info in case I was hurt and had to go to a hospital, etc. I hid it in the spare tire wheel space of my car. The top layer was just clothing that I had some shopping bags, and it looked like I had bought clothes without him knowing. Anyway, he found it one day. Luckily, he just took the shopping bag out and got real pissed off. Left everything else. Anyway, I never got to use it for myself because he got arrested, thank God, but afterwards, I noticed a friend had the look of being abused. It was pretty clear what was happening. After gently approaching her, she acknowledged that she was being abused but didn't feel like she could leave. So I helped her hook up with a domestic violence victim advocate, but I also had her change her name in my phone to a pizza shop. I made her a go-right-now bag for her and put it in my car. Well, 30 days later, I got a call for a large cheese pizza with extra sauce. I called 911, drove to her house, beat the cops there, and heard her screaming bloody murder. I knocked the window out and I climbed in. Saw her husband with a knife with blood all over it. I just ran and grabbed her, unlocked the door, got her into the car. Had the phone on me the whole time. I had a first aid kit with a ton of wound gauze, so I just pressed that in and waited as the husband tried to take out the window. Finally, I told the 911 operator that I was gonna drive down a ways, and the cop showed up, arrested the husband, took my friend to the hospital. Saved her life, and since her home was a crime scene, she needed the go-right-now bag. I keep a generic one in my car at all times. I've used more than one for more than a few women and one for a man. Once you've been through it, you can see it. I never want to be unprepared, just in case. Story number 14. I want to add a trigger warning to this before I dive in to protect those who have dealt with abuse. So, growing up, my dad really instilled the fear of not being prepared into my head. If you have ever watched Freaks and Geeks, the dad at the dinner table recounting someone he knew who died as a result of their actions was a pretty spot-on impression. It extended beyond don't run with scissors, but to don't carry things in your lap when you're in a car or you'll be cut in half, or walk opposite of traffic so if someone tries to kidnap you, you can kick their door in and run away. I instinctively catalog items when entering a room based on what could be a good weapon, and have had to familiarize myself with preserving evidence. The last one is what came in handy. Unfortunately, one of the worst-case scenarios befell our family 2 years ago. My oldest daughter disclosed that she had been SA'd by my father-in-law. I went into full autopilot here, took my daughter to a safe room, had family pick up my dog and youngest daughter, made sure she didn't wash her hands. When she had to use the restroom, I asked her not to wipe. We didn't change her clothes, we didn't have her brush her teeth. The DNA evidence that they were able to collect off of her put him in prison and will keep him there. Surprisingly, this has helped my overthinking. We're all getting a lot of therapy right now, and I've started to learn that it's okay to not be okay for everything. Sometimes life sucks, and most of the time, it's completely out of our control. Story number 15. I know the lyrics precisely. One rap song, the Biggie Smalls/Miley Cyrus mashup, Party and Bullcrap in the USA. I just like the song, but I am also markedly decidedly Caucasian. One year for my birthday, my friend got us tickets to the Star Wars-themed pop-up bar in New York City, and we went in costume. I was wearing screen-accurate Jedi robes, boots, belt, fancy costume saber, the whole deal. As a result, the staff kept feeding us drink tokens to be merry and entertaining for the normal guests. And while my friend the Ewok was grinding up on Darth Vader, I'm drunkenly bopping next to a breakdancing stormtrooper, both cast, when lo and behold, the DJ starts playing Party and Bullcrap in the USA. I start singing along, tapping the stormtrooper's breastplate at Better Throw My Vest on My Chest, and the guy pulls me over to the DJ booth. Between verses, they set up a mic really quick and pass it to me. I fumble a little to get into it and then crush the last two verses while passing the mic to some girl who was standing next to me so she can sing the Miley chorus. Anyway, that's the story of how I trained for years to drunkenly rap Biggie Smalls in front of 100 strangers while dressed like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Story number 16. At my work, there are lots of things that can go wrong and lots of settings you can adjust to solve them or break everything. After a month of being called at all hours of the day and night and weekend to solve a problem, I decided to sit down and spent a week coming up with a flowchart of everything that can go wrong. After the flowchart was put in place, I still received calls because apparently people have trouble reading, and since this place was a revolving door of new hires, explaining was troublesome. So I wrote a script that executed the flowchart to the letter. So when I received a call, instead of explaining everything, I just said, "Click X button." Well, 8 months later, a new executive gets hired. He noticed the system I put in place. He calls me in his office and asked me, "How many calls have you received for you to put that in place?" And I said, "I'm not sure, most days." And he paid me 1 hour of overtime for each day of the year. He took the flowchart and modified it into a mandatory training manual and made the script part of the operation interface. Also gave me a promotion. I know stories of a-hole bosses and incompetent corporate are more juicy, but I overthinked every part of my job and some guy saw its potential. With all the money he gave me, including the promotion, it was very cheap for them to get such a system. So yeah, my advice is learn coding and automate your job. If your company fires you for it, they are dumb as F. Story number 17. I always carry 2 travel toothbrushes and a travel-sized toothpaste, pack of baby wipes, and deodorant. When traveling a bit further, I also bring a change of t-shirt, a small towel, some tampons, pads, and extra hairbands, even though I can just barely wear mine up. But this is all because I grew up as the oldest of 4 kids, and looking after a child 11 years younger makes you prepared. Anyway, I was on a school trip with my master's course to London one time. It was suddenly pouring down, and one of the girls had a white shirt on and it got see-through. So I pulled out one of my many weird graphic tees and I handed it over. To help further, I pulled out a small face towel I keep in my bag and let her wipe down. I am a tall, 5'10", and broad girl, so I just pulled my coat open and kind of caged in this poor 5'2" girl and looked away as she changed in this makeshift changing room. Anyway, the shirt was huge on her, but it helped keep the cool air off the tops of her legs. Then another time, I had pre-booked and sorted out my train journey, bought snacks and a portable charger for a short 30-minute journey, which quickly turned into 4 hours because of an accident and delays and further. And well, I was set, and I was able to give the family with 2 kids across the walkway of me some fruit. I had apples and some tangerines, and I also allowed the kids to use my sketchbook to draw in it. It was a ratty old thing. Overthinking and overpreparing can be tedious, but worth it when it comes to situations. I so very much must agree with OP's sentiment there that overthinking is very tedious, but it can be very helpful. So that's why I underthink. I underthink here on Undersparked. I just thought of that right now. But I don't know if I'm going to have any relevant stories as I record this one. I'm going to try and think of an instance where I overthought or just came like super duper prepared. Or maybe one of these stories will trigger a random memory for me, but I'm not a big overthinker. You know, I can see the big picture and think, but I don't know if I'm an overthinker. Anyway, next story. Story number 18. Maybe not overthinking, but I saw a news story about a kid who fell on an escalator and died. They had the obligatory 6-second clip of someone saying what you should do if you ever see someone in that situation, and I filed it away because it seemed terrifying. Well, about 7 years later, a little kid in front of me slipped on the escalator leaving a DC metro station. His mom was gingerly trying to free his pant leg and shoelaces. I spazzed out as we approached the top of the escalator and yanked the kid up and away from the rail with my forearms under his armpits. The shoe and pant leg remained stuck, but the actual kid was fine. Albeit barefoot and missing most of one pant leg, my heart rate spikes like crazy crazy just retelling the story, and I bet if I hadn't watched the local news, I would not have had the clarity to realize what to do in that moment on account of the adrenaline. Then, one time, I also self-administered the Heimlich maneuver using the back of a kitchen chair when I was around 10. I tried to swallow too big of a piece of steak wrapped in bacon, and no one at the cookout recognized the mimed "I'm choking" signal that we learned in first aid. I hit the chair like with a flying leap, like I was Jimmy Snuka, and the food popped out. I distinctly remember our dog grabbing the food from the ground almost immediately and being really happy with me. Story number 19. How about when paranoia and preparation still doesn't save you from insanity that should not have happened in the first place? So, I work on small film sets, and one time we had several reproduction rifles that we needed to get into a car for a shoot. The location is out in the boonies on private land, so I know using the prop rifles out there would be no problem. Well, I was having extreme anxiety about what was the fact that I had to move the rifles from the house to the car in my urban neighborhood. Like, I literally rehearsed that moment in my head 6 times. Just have to wrap the guns in the towel, walk them out to the vehicle, stick them in the trunk. What is there to worry about? So I get those guns wrapped in the towel, exit the basement door, walk through my driveway, cross the grass of my front lawn, and a guy makes a beeline for me across the street. Not wanting to be holding guns while I talk to someone, I put them down on the lawn in front of me, but I notice that one of the handles is now sticking out of the towel and pretty noticeable. My foot isn't doing a great job of keeping the handle covered. Well, the guy asks me if I have any lighter fluid. My brain is firing with anxiety now, and I can't even think straight. And I see my partner exit the house with an armload and drop it in the trunk. I yell out to him and ask if he knows if we have any lighter fluid, because my brain is not processing what is happening anymore. Well, my partner, not knowing what is going on, heads inside the house to look for the lighter fluid, and me and this strange man awkwardly stand in my front lawn making horrible small talk like the weather or how's it going, etc. And the guns are still at my feet and are no longer well disguised. It felt like 10 minutes passed by like that, terribly long, and just when I start to think things will hopefully resolve soon or this guy will get bored and leave, I see a cop drive by, then casually park down the block. Then the cop gets out and walks up to us. Me still standing on the lawn with reproduction, realistic-looking non-marked guns at my feet, sticking out of their towel disguise, and this stranger standing in front of me. The cop walks up, stands next to the guy, spends a few seconds taking this whole scene in, and then turns to the guy and says, "So, I hear you've been asking all over the neighborhood for lighter fluid. Let's take a little walk and talk about it." They both turn and walk down the block, and I stand there stunned for a moment, then grab the sloppy pile of guns and towel, run to the car, throw them in the back, and close the hatch. My partner comes out and says he can't find any lighter fluid, and then also makes the connection finally to ask why the guy needs it anyways. Turns out the poor guy was having a mental breakdown and was going to burn his car with the fluid. And that is the time of the story. I just needed 10 seconds to get a pile of guns in my car. Story number 20. A little backstory. I've always had bad anxiety when it comes to relationships. So much so that it has ruined most of them. I just get paranoid of something happening, even if it's only because they hadn't texted me back in an hour or something. Like all the worst scenarios. Cheating, not liking me anymore, and worse, something bad happening to them. Anyway, once it happened. It was 2013. I was dating this girl in college. Nothing too serious. It was summer and we lived about 2 hours apart when we weren't in session. We both lived in the dorms when we were there, so we only got to see each other a couple of times that summer. This time, however, the day before one of the times we were supposed to hang out, I texted her to confirm the plans, and we arranged to meet at her local Walmart at 2 p.m. the next day. She confirmed and told me she was at a party, so she probably wouldn't communicate much for the rest of the night. I didn't think anything of it and went about my night. Well, the next day rolled around, and I texted her that morning. I didn't get a response, but figured she was still asleep, so I went ahead and started driving. She didn't respond the whole way there, and I start freaking out about the usual stuff. It went from her standing me up, to her not liking me anymore, to her canceling the plans, to the inevitable something terrible has happened to her. This was a normal thing for me, so I just kept trying to brush it off. Anyway, I get to the Walmart about half an hour early. I texted her saying that I was there. Nothing. I scrolled Facebook and all of that. Still nothing. I waited and waited. It was finally about 3 p.m. when I gave up and tried to call her to get an immediate response. Fortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I didn't know exactly where she lived because we'd always meet somewhere. Else, I probably would have driven. So I call. Nothing. Call back. Nothing. I waited a few minutes and decided I would try to call one more time before I headed back home. This time, someone answered. It was her sister. She was crying. She told me that the girl I was dating, we weren't official yet, had died the night before. Her and her friend were driving to get food after the party. They were both drunk. They got into a single car accident on a winding road and flew off an embankment. The girl died instantly. The friend who had been driving was unscathed. And it really effed me up. Like I said, we weren't too serious, so it wasn't as bad as if we'd been together a long time, but still, no one wants to hear that. I felt so bad, not just for myself, but her family and friends. I sent flowers because they weren't having a public funeral on account of her being pretty mangled. Anyway, yeah, I can't say I was prepared for it, even though my mind went there, but it was one of my worst fears come true. Something I had thought about 1,000 times in other relationships before and since, and it never happened, but for the one time it did. I'd always been anxious in a relationship before, but it got way worse. I just kept telling myself that it was a one-time thing and the odds were that it wouldn't happen again. There was a good half-decade where I couldn't make a relationship last more than a month because I was too anxious. I think it would probably be better now, but alas, I haven't had the opportunity to date anyone for the last 3 years or so. Anyway, it effing sucked. Story number 21. At the start of the pandemic here, there were rumors going around that we might go into a lockdown. Of course, it was only going to be for 2 weeks and then everything would be over. No big deal. Oh, the old days. Anyway, I was in the final stages of my data analysis for my PhD, meaning that once I was done, I'd no longer need to go to the lab for anything. Also, I needed access to the lab for the programs to actually do the analysis. Well, one night I'm getting all these messages from family and friends, and the secret's out. Thanks to emergency responders who got an early heads up, and we're locking down tomorrow. It's 10:30 p.m., but I grabbed some extra bags and bus it to the lab. I was there until around 4 a.m. finishing every possible analysis I could think of I might even remotely need for my dissertation. Then, when I finally finished, I packed up everything of mine from the lab with the assumption I'd never make it back. And then I had to walk home with it all since it was too late for the bus. And we did lock down the next day, and the campus was closed. Of course, it was supposed to only 2 weeks, so my friends were all laughing at my panicked venture, saying it was ridiculous to think I needed to do the analysis ASAP and walk home so late carrying all that stuff. Well, it's been over a year now. Guess what campus and lab still isn't open? Guess who never made it back to the lab? I never ended up moving back home far out of the city. Not a concern thanks to my apparent overthinking about the lockdown. Story number 22. I spent 2 or 3 days scrubbing the room. That included a bathroom, which I spent a lot of time cleaning as well, that I was renting. And I was only living there 4 months, so there wasn't much chance of me to cause any wear and tear. I was in a really bad place mentally and was taking it really seriously since I was paranoid that I wouldn't get my deposit back. I tend to get paranoid when anxious. And the room was honestly clean. I never damaged anything. Then I didn't get part of my deposit back because I didn't clean the bathroom supposedly. The person I was subletting from sent me pictures to prove it, and frankly, it was just pictures of calcium built up in the sink, which is a particularly bad problem for water in that city. I also showed friends the picture, and they all asked what was wrong with the bathroom because they couldn't see anything. It's also illegal to charge from the deposit for either cleaning or normal wear and tear, but it's common courtesy to clean it if you're renting from someone. Tell me, how would it cost you 150 euros to scrub off some calcium? The deposit isn't for you to draw from if I mildly inconvenience you because you're a princess that needs to be able to see her reflection on every surface. Well, I was so angry that I just removed myself from the situation and didn't bother fighting for that money. F that. I was really busy and under stress. I took more time than usual just to clean due to my paranoia, and then had my paranoia proven right. I feel like these sorts of small things happen to me all the time. I get paranoid, and then the thing happens I was paranoid about, and I'm supposed to just be calm and confident? Okay, so side note about this story, I have never seen this before, and it's a little weird, and I thought I would share it. You know how when you type, you use periods, right? Well, OP in the original text doesn't use periods. It's just hyphens everywhere. There's like 20 hyphens in the story. Swap every period in a paragraph and put a hyphen in it. It's so weird. I've never seen that before. I don't know. What's the point? I'm a hyphen advocate. I love my hyphens, but that's a little weird. But anyway, next story. Story number 23. Saw an old man fall down. Maybe hit his head, maybe didn't. He denied that he hit his head. It drew a lot of attention and told everyone to leave him alone. Basically, he was being stubborn that he was fine. After a minute or two, he went unconscious. I told my friend to call 911 911, sat down next to him, and held his hand until he woke up. Right when he woke up, I started asking him about his life, tried to get basic information. Where does he live? How old is he? What other health problems he might have? I did it all in a way that just made it seem like we were chatting. The paramedics arrived, I relayed all relevant information to the paramedics, and I went on my way. I felt bad for basically building a bridge of trust and then dipping. He was a little distraught about me leaving. I wasn't in a situation where I could follow him to the hospital at the time or check in. I wanted to give the paramedics the relevant information to assess the situation and make the best choices for the guy. I do well in high-stress, fast-paced situations like this because I overthink everything. I do poorly in high-stress, slow-paced situations, the type that can take weeks, because I overthink everything and basically fail to make choices. Story number 24. So I have health anxiety and maybe OCD, not diagnosed yet, and I had for weeks an obsession with anaphylaxis. I was scared that I would have it, and I was scared that people around me would have anaphylaxis just like that. Well, one day a friend of mine came to visit and complained about a headache. He asked if I had a pill, and well, I had it. My house is like a little pharmacy. I had a pill which contained Tylenol and other stuff, but of course he did not know the ingredients because he never took that pill before. I was ready to hand him the pill, and it occurred to me randomly just to ask him if he's allergic to something. My other friends who were there with us were like, "Oh, you're starting again with that anaphylaxis thing?" and blah, blah, blah. But turns out my friend was anaphylactic to Tylenol, which he knew about, and it was his only allergy, but he just didn't ask what the pill contains. I scolded him for it, and he was really irresponsible given the fact that he doesn't carry any allergy medication just in case, and we were far away from a hospital. Also, I know a lot of stuff because of my health anxiety, which is really helpful, like using an EpiPen, doing CPR, Heimlich maneuver. More than happy to save someone's life thanks to overthinking. Story number 25. I did not at all predict a global pandemic, but my team was completely prepared for it thanks to my overplanning. Early last February, I attended a random online meeting on a platform where the speaker could share his screen. That was the first time I had seen something like that, and it got me thinking about how something like that might get more parents to actually participate in IEP meetings. The platform that presenter used was a paid product, but I googled around until I found this free thing called Zoom. I tried it out and it seemed pretty perfect. So by mid-February, I required my team to sign up for an account and we practiced using it. They had to include the Zoom link and instructions in their meeting invitations, and I made everyone hold at least 2 practice meetings and 1 real meeting using it. Well, 2 weeks later, the world shut down and everyone was panicking about how to get their work done. But my team just flowed right into virtual meetings because I had inexplicably made them learn how to do it a month earlier. We really looked like the shining stars of the district. Story number 26. So, this is going to sound like one of those stories that you hear on r/I have sex, but what the hell? Why not share it? So, whenever I go on vacation, I'm a classic overthinker and overprepare way too much. I'll sit down with my suitcase for a couple of hours and run through different scenarios to the point where I find myself packing my TV remote just in case the rental I'm staying at has the same TV that I have and the remote stops working. Don't know why I do this, but I do. Well, one thing I've always done is pack a single condom, because in my head I'd think of a scenario of me being a single guy on vacation that happens to have a fling with some other vacationer, and then we go our separate ways. I did this for several years and never ever made a single friend while on vacation. But one summer, when my friends and I went on our annual camping trip, I befriended this girl who was my age at the campground. I was the only single one in my friend group, so it wasn't out of the ordinary for the couples to go do their own things while I hung around the cabin and just read a book for a couple of hours. I don't even remember how we initially started chatting, but over the course of the week, I befriended and chatted daily with this girl who was staying in a camper at the same campground. With both of us being single, 20-something horny degenerates, we started flirting and talking dirty to each other. The last night we were there, my friends all wanted to leave early rather than wait till morning, but I said I would stay behind since I drove separately anyway. I didn't tell them, but I just wanted one more night to spend with this girl. I invited her over to the cabin, and it did not take long for us to start making out. And at one point she told me she wished we could have sex, and lo and behold, I pulled out my condom that I had packed away exactly for a fantasy like this. And to this day, it's the most unusual, movie-esque, and exciting sexual experience I've ever had. Story number 27. In 1978, I was horribly scrawny, a 14-year-old kid going through puberty. I had Star Wars and Hobbit in my blood. I was a nerd. I was also going on a study trip to France that summer because I kicked ass in French class, and my mom paid for it. 70% of the rest of the kids on the trip were older high school girls. Naturally, I wanted to impress them, and being a scrawny kid, I would fantasize about situations where my cleverness would win the day. So I imagined many heroic scenarios, but one was where some young French males would surround me and several of these young women catcalling and attempting to seduce the innocent lasses. And I, being clever, would confuse them by telling these rapscallions, in French of course, that they were from Norway, and somehow that would allow the girls to get away. I wasn't a detailed planner. Well, we were studying in a coastal town, and one day a Navy ship came in, and as I was walking the seafront with 4 of these young women, we were suddenly surrounded by about 8 horny French sailors who were catcalling and attempting to seduce. Quickly, I sprung into action. First, I got the sailors' attention. Then I announced, in French naturally, that we were from Norway, and, well, the sailors were completely stumped at how to respond to such an announcement. They began to pepper me with questions, and I pretended, well, not really pretended, that I didn't speak French very well. And somehow during all of that, the girls managed to get away. It effing worked. They thought I was brave. Story number 28. I once saved my cat from almost certain death by predicting that she had entered a neighboring condo unit and been locked inside. Hours had gone by without seeing our cat, who regularly goes outside and returns. I check all the usual places and go through the psh 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 catnip routine, nothing, and we were the only full-time residents in a 14-unit condo block, and weekend traffic had left town a few days before. After a few hours of searching, I started to run through more elaborate scenarios when I remembered the glass repair truck in the lower lot the day before. I called the repair shop to confirm that there had been a repair the day before, and they gave me the unit number. After a few knocks on the windows, Pippin jumps up looking very happy to see me. I quickly called building management, freed the hungry cat, and quickly called the glass repair shop in tears to thank the woman for sharing the address. We have since moved, and now Pippin gets locked inside our neighbor's shed. Who knew? It's just for funsies. Story number 29. My dad bought me a survival kit, which included some basic but neat elements like a compass, emergency heat blanket, nylon belt links for holding accessories while hiking, a carbon fiber knife with a grinding stone on the back, and a heavy-duty pen that has a stabby bit at the aft end in case you need to bust open a car window or use the pen as a weapon, and some other miscellaneous gadgets. Now, I laughed at the prison pen, but I made it a part of my daily kit. Mostly as a novelty, the rest of the stuff I left in my car in the package. It was a larger pen, and I have somewhat larger hands, so it was more ergonomic. And no one was going to mistake borrowing that thing and forget to give it to me back. But I'm a teacher. What was I going to do, stab somebody? Well, anyway, I stabbed someone. A guy tried to put his hand through the driver's side window as I was parked at a traffic light at night trying to pull off a carjacking. I got him in the back of the hand as he was fumbling to unlock the door, and the only reason I reacted fast enough was because the door was locked and the window wasn't all the way down. He recoiled. I saw some kind of blade in his left hand, and I gunned the turn to get away. He ran off. I got away. I reported the incident. No idea if they got the guy. In retrospect, I'm pissed off that I didn't have the wherewithal to shout something witty like, "The pen is mightier, you B-word," but I was scared and in robot do-it-or-die mode. I was also lucky that the guy had a knife and not a pistol in this instance. Asking the auto shop about their recommended procedure to get bloodstains out of my car was also awkward. Story number 30. When my son was a toddler, I picked up a brochure from the pediatrician's office on how to perform CPR in children. I remember spending extra time reading through it several times that week and really thinking about what it would be like to help a small child breathe. The next week, on a beautiful autumn day, we were at the park and my 2-year-old fell and hit the back of his head and went limp. No crying, no screaming, nothing. Just limp, no breathing. Then he started to turn blue and have a seizure. It was horrifying. I screamed and panicked, but then I remembered that I know how to help him breathe with the CPR I had been studying. I laid him on the ground while someone called for help, and I tilted his head back and breathed into his body and pushed the air out and repeated. I did this until he started to breathe on his own. The ambulance came and he spent days in the hospital recovering from the trauma. He is a strong, kind, beautiful young man these days, and I am absolutely proud watching him skate and BMX and do normal life stuff. I'm so grateful for everything that led me to read that brochure with such diligence. Story number 31. I found a missing person and I was not ready. So my father's house is in a small village, and I went over there to visit during my lectures week. The night before, around 3 a.m., the dog was barking all night for no reason, which was weird because he only barks when a car passes by or someone is on our property, but no one was around. My ex was beginning his year in forest studies, or whatever you call it in English, and he had to find branches and pine cones for his project. There was this forest right behind the house and it was spring. I was super down to go. Well, we go get the dog and my dad stops us. He tells us that they found the car of a missing person in the street and that the police has been looking for her since last night. He says, "You probably won't find her in the woods because the cops have been looking around with search dogs all night and haven't found her. But just in case if you find her, call me right away." Well, we go, the dog is happy, we get the branches, and I mess around laughing and telling my ex, "Imagine in the papers tomorrow, 2 students looking for pine cones find missing person." And I just found it funny, and I was joking. We walk around, we get the leaves, branches, and it's time to leave. I go get the unleashed dog, and I get his collar, and I see in the leaves a piece of fabric. Oh, no big deal, it's a maple tree farm. Someone must have dropped it and never bothered to come back. Well, I looked right beside it, and I see a hand. An effing hand coming out from the ground, all pale and dirty. I just froze. I turned around and told my ex a couple feet behind, "There's a hand. It's the lady. We found the lady. She's there. There's a hand." And then an effing head pops up from the leaves from the ground. The lady wasn't looking good. She was white, basically blue, and her eyes were wide open. She looked at me straight in the eyes and whispered, "Don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody." And I don't know how I did not crap myself, but my brain was just not processing this. But hopefully my ex was very calm and told me that the best thing we could do is go back and call my dad once we get some signal. Which we did, and the cops arrived before we could get back to the house. Took us in their four-wheelers and we went straight back to find her in the same spot, still buried under the leaves. Yes, she was hidden under the autumn leaves. She was shaking and didn't look too good, and when she saw me, she thanked me for finding good cops that were nice to her, told me that she loved my dog, and she hugged me before leaving. I never got to know what happened to her. Story number 32, COVID. Specifically, my parents' indiscipline, selfishness, and immaturity infecting our entire family with COVID if they came back to our country for home leave. They are great in some ways, but toxic or incompetent in others. But this is something I warned them about. I broke things down for them into bite-sized pieces to explain how they will infect us and basically reduce us into prisoners for a month. And how they will not learn their lesson and do stupid crap like getting a haircut from a barber the day after they get a negative test result. I told them they should not come to our country until things were under control and instead enjoy the freedom of their embassy compound. Enjoy the fact that they can go to the gym, order whatever, go for morning walks with their friends, but don't come here because you won't be able to sit inside and only go out for essentials. Forget infecting people that aren't our family. They couldn't even show enough care to not risk the health of their siblings and their own children. And for what? Did my dad need urgent work completed? No. Did my mother need urgent health checkups? No. All because they wanted to be religious tourists and travel to an effing temple, out of state using public transport. Now, after their own parents, siblings, and children are still criticizing them for their lack of empathy, intelligence, and discipline, have they learned their lesson? Nope. And guess who knew this was going to happen back in February of 2020 after Italy and Spain were ravaged? And guess who only watched Indian conservative propaganda news instead of listening to their relatives actually living here? I have a 6-year-old cousin with her parents that lives in our extended family home with us. And sure, kids aren't really in danger, but who in their right mind willingly takes that bet just so that they can live like teenagers despite being over 50? Like, what the hell? My cousin showed more patience and understanding than them. My younger brother has a fever for a week, and 50% of the idiot couple had breathing difficulties, needing special medicine and multiple in-house doctor visits, and still 0% of the stupid couple learned. And I don't know, I've heard of parents calling their kids stupid or thinking they are, but growing up knowing your parents are incompetent and toxic and can theoretically do this, versus actually seeing them do this, surpass even the most likely scenario in your head, and give you an effing bingo in the extreme things my parents can do, doesn't feel satisfying. It's just sad. Story number 33. Stepfather was working on the boat and managed to throw it off balance and took the hitch to the head. My mom freaked out, but my immediate reaction was to grab some towels from the bathroom for the bleeding and offer to call 911. It was bad. I was about 12 to 13. When I was 4, my mom ended up with stitches in her foot after stepping on a razor in the shower. I calmly went to the neighbor to ask for help. And as a teen, my mischievous younger brother was going through a pyro phase and thought it would be funny to set the deck on fire with a cup of gasoline. Before I could say don't, my ex thought he would put it out by filling said cup with water, which mixed with the gasoline and made it worse. I somehow managed to get it out with the spare extinguisher I knew we kept in the shed. Parents never found out about that one. Score. Then in my 20s, I fell off a ladder while working on a roof and had a first aid kit and athletic tape in my car. I was able to ice it for 15 minutes and tape it up, tie up my boot, and return to work on the roof. Went to my second job, then the ER in the morning where an odd doctor told me he's never seen a break so bad. I cracked my talus, aka ankle joint, completely in half. A few surgeries later, and it's fine. And then finally, car flipped over on an off-ramp on the highway in front of me, had a spare blanket and first aid kit, tried to keep him as calm as possible until EMTs arrived and asked for his name, meds, etc. to tell first responders. Story number 34. Oh boy, my time to shine. My husband talking to someone in an intimate way and sending photos. He'd become really distant, and he would stay up all night, late at night, to the point where I would go to bed earlier than him. For context, I am a night owl. He goes to sleep early and rises early. Honestly, I would be laying in my bed thinking, he's gotta be cheating on me. He's definitely cheating on me. Oh God, don't be that way. Don't think like that. Stop. Well, one night I go to bed at 10 p.m. and he's still on his computer playing a game. The usual. I wake up at 1 a.m. because I'm hot, and then I remember that I hadn't turned the AC back on from earlier that day. Decided to go turn it on, and I notice he's still not in bed. I think he must have fallen asleep downstairs. Not unusual. Then I hear his computer, him typing away, clicking a notification sound going off. Okay, also not unusual. He might be playing with his friends, and instead of voice chatting, because he gets extremely loud, he's just using Facebook Messenger. The old days before Discord this was. And he sees me, and he just kind of looks like, uh-oh. And I say to him, hey, it's really late, you coming to bed? And he just says, yeah. And I ask him if he's playing with his friends, and if they're still trying to rank up in League of Legends, and he just says, yeah. Vaguely, I just kind of go, huh, okay, and go back upstairs. 2 hours later, he comes up, wakes me up, and says, I need to tell you something. And I'm thinking maybe he was playing a tournament or something and won or whatever. But what I was not expecting was for him to say to me, I want this to come from me. I've been talking to this woman, and she asked me to come see her next weekend, and when I refused, she said she was going to message you and tell you. So I thought you should know from me. I already blocked her, but I'm sure she remembers my name and can look you up. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do, but I didn't want it to go that far. And then I look at him and I just say, well, where's your computer? You can report her for harassing you and I'll block her on my account too. I'm like really not surprised at all. And he tells me everything and is shocked at how calm I was. And then I tell him, I'm going home for a while. I don't know if I'm coming back. I need a break from you. I don't know why you'd do this. I feel like it's my fault, but I'm just going to go home. And I left for almost 2 months. We worked through a lot. I told him that unless he can figure out why he felt the need to reach out to someone else in an intimate way and not his wife, who is always open and wanting to talk to him about his feelings, don't talk to me. It took him a few days, and he wrote a very long message explaining things, and we ended up going to therapy. We worked a lot out of it. Overthinking like that and telling myself, if it happens, this is what's going to happen, helped me cope when it did happen. I knew exactly what to do, who to call, and where I was going to go. It might be because my dad cheated on my mom and she had no type of plan. She kicked my dad out but was still a mess. She was completely absent from us kids. She even just left us at our grandma's with her dad and just left for a few days. Didn't tell us why or where she was. I just think that experience really made me think, if I have to leave, this is where I'll go, who I will call, and what I need to do first. Story number 35, pandemic shenanigans and being made redundant. At the very start of the pandemic, I had a sixth sense, and I remember leaving work on a normal day just before lockdown began. Overnight, we were all told workplaces would close indefinitely, and I was thinking, I feel like this is the last time I'll ever set foot here again. Weird and completely true. I'd been there for 16 years and was highly respected in my field, fine art restoration. The field itself was thriving at the time, if niche, and I had no concrete reason to begin to doubt things. As soon as I was furloughed, thank God, and despite promises from my boss, who was like a father to me after all this time, I had a sneaky suspicion that not only was I going to lose my much-loved job, but that my wider career was going to be impossible given the economic climate, and that I would be out of work for years to come. It was very difficult accepting that this could be true, given the long years I'd been specializing in my field. I just knew that in all probability, given a pandemic, combined with Brexit and change of regulations, that on balance that there would be no call for a specialist such as me for a long time. My reputation would be nothing in the face of such a crisis. Oh God, how I was right. I thought to myself, for now, I've got furlough pay. Then I'll have redundancy, and whatever happens, I won't be earning for a while. So let's take this opportunity to retrain. I'd better get ahead of the curve, just in case, because as soon as the redundancies start and the economy begins to tank, everyone will want to retrain, and we won't even get into education if I wait to see what will happen. So I thought long and hard about what I would like to do, and quietly signed up for a college diploma in horticulture, with a view to eventually be working in historic gardens, starting that September. Talk about foresight. Foresight. As less than a month before my course was due to begin, I was indeed made redundant, and I was able to take up my place like a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat. It's been a difficult year and an extremely rewarding transition. Early on, I tried talking to my closest previous colleague about my thoughts on what we were facing, and he just did not accept it. I tried urging him to take this time to think about his future and begin to make plans. Unfortunately, to this day, he still believes that somehow things will just work out if he waits long enough. He still has no work, has not done anything for over a year now, and the redundancy payment has run out. He is a hard lesson to me. Comparing the two of our responses to this crisis has really opened my eyes, and not a little devastating to see. I love him and hope that somehow the market will recover for him soon, but my spidey sense is not optimistic. Ultimately, gotta take the time to look hard at your own life. Think things through and take responsibility for yourself, and yes, make backup plans because the world owes us no favors and crap happens. So, a few things about this story. I've noticed that ever since I've started recording for Undersparked, that there have been a lot of stories about the pandemic. And I understand it's a thing that happened to some people, or correction, it's a thing that happened to every people, but I'm just somewhat baffled, but also not surprised that it just keeps finding a way to come into like every video I've done here, whereas opposed to Really Sparked, where we could go several videos without mentioning the pandemic. And as for art restoration itself, I think that is an incredibly cool thing, something that I probably would not have the talent to do, but I respect it. And also, did you know that John Wick's original hobby in the films was supposed to be book restoration, but they cut that out because how can you feasibly include that into a film for time? Anyway, next story. Story number 36. Friend. If you ever need to reject a guy you don't think you would take no for an answer, tell him you're underage. That works for us because most people guess we're 12 to 14 without any makeup on. And then, some tips I found online. If you find yourself in a situation where you are being pursued in public, draw attention to yourself so that the pursuer notices people are watching and would become hesitant to do anything. I have kept this stuff burnt in my mind because I'm always overthinking situations where I would be out in public and suddenly get stalked. PTSD from what had happened to me twice growing up, except both times I was walking home from school and there weren't many people outside in these neighborhoods. Well, when I was visiting downtown Chicago for a music festival, my friend and I ordered food late at night because we couldn't sleep and walked a few streets down from our hotel to get it. Some guy pissing in the street noticed us walking out of the shop and started shouting, "Hey, wait up!" while he hurriedly tried to get his pants up and chase after us. It was clear that he was interested in my friend and she was terrified. She started to run, but I couldn't because I was holding our food, so I took in my surroundings, searching for help, and noticed there were quite a lot of people around at 1 a.m. I immediately heard that advice in my head and shouted as loud as I could, "We're underage!" And I shouted that back to him, and he abruptly stopped and people turned around to stare. They glossed over at us and people stared at him, so he took off. Story number 37. I carry a complete change of clothes, including socks and underwear in my car. Years ago, I was working as a nanny, and the mom was out of state for work and scheduled in a Skype call between dinner and bedtime. So after we clean up for dinner, we go into the home office and I started the call. The 3-year-old sat on my lap and the 9-year-old on the arm of the desk chair. A few minutes into the call, the toddler was so excited to see her mommy that she peed herself and me, and I wish I could have seen my face as my pants and underpants became soaked. I reckon it was hilarious. At least my presence stopped the flow before it hit the desk chair. I stayed calm and collected while the mom, who I had not yet met in person, was very embarrassed and apologetic. The 9-year-old was happy that she got some alone time with mom while I cleaned up her sister and myself. Also related, the same toddler went through a phase some months later where she had more potty accidents. So I started packing extra pairs of her panties every time we went out to the park. I used reusable grocery bags to bring that day's toys, as well as snacks and drinks, etc. And most days, she didn't need them, and I replaced them in her dresser. Well, one night as I was buying my groceries on my way home from work, the bagger said in a very concerned voice, "Do you know that there is a pair of little green panties in your bag?" And I think he and the cashier were concerned that I was a predator. I laughed and told them about my adventures being a nanny, and we all had a good laugh about it. Story number 38. I periodically practice scenarios where my apartment, can be just my apartment or the entire complex, is either on fire or filled with poisonous gas. One day I come home from lunch because I don't work far from where I live, and when I opened the door, there was a haze in the air. I could see beams of light through the blinds, which highlighted the haze, so I knew it wasn't my imagination, and instantly, I held my breath. I thought it was dust at first, so I wasn't too alarmed but stayed by the door just in case. I wanted minimal contact with whatever it was because anxiety, and I waved my hand through the air, and it was stagnant enough for me to figure out it wasn't dust. I didn't smell anything before I held my breath, so I thought carbon monoxide. But then the alarm wasn't going off, so that couldn't be it. I was still holding my breath, but I went through the apartment opening all the windows and turning off ventilation, only stopping to breathe when I could stick my head out of the window. Then I waited, still holding breath until everything visibly cleared. Then I went through the apartment checking for anything abnormal, where it could have come from, cracks in the walls, something small catching fire, etc. Turns out my gas on the stove had been on for 5 hours. So now I have another situation to practice periodically. Story number 39. Some guy actually broke into my house. I always have anxiety with strangers, and that doesn't help that I spent most of my early teenage years listening to YouTubers like Lazy Masquerade, Mr. Creepypasta, or Mr. Nightmare, who, if you don't know, read scary stories for a living. That, coupled with bad experiences with strangers, always made me hypersensitive to the fact that there could be creepers around me. I often ended up overthinking myself into situations where I'm face to face with creepers. Well, I was home alone with my brother at the time, and our drugged-up neighbor broke in. Due to him being obsessed with video games and me constantly overthinking myself into situations like that, the both of us were able to fight him off and lived to tell the tale, even though he was armed with knives, bear spray, and pepper spray. I will say, though, that it was nothing at all like I ever imagined, and I did freeze on the spot and not know what to do for a moment. Once I was able to snap out of it, though, we were able to fight him off. There are news reports about it, and the guy is still awaiting trial. I personally don't want to link them, but if you want to, you can look them up for yourself. It's Sleepy Hollow Home Invasion 2019. I even have the scars to prove it was me. Story number 41. My dog one night was having some tummy issues. He'd let out a big yelp, and I put him on my lap and gave him a bit of a once-over, and I thought, his belly feels really full, so constipation or internal bleeding? Then I thought to myself, nah, you're overreacting. But there was like no other symptoms. So a few days later, he has an accident in the apartment, which was weird, and there was blood in his urine. So I run him immediately to the vet. Everyone with experience was like, it's probably not urgent, he must have a UTI. And the vet is also not super concerned, but says, if you want, I can do an ultrasound. I said yes because I couldn't get the thought of him bleeding internally out of my head. And if it was a kidney stone or something, I wanted to know sooner rather than later. Well, it turns out he had a tumor that had burst, and he was bleeding internally. And if I had left him overnight, well, I would have woken up to a horrific surprise. He had a type of cancer with symptoms that include sudden, unexplainable death, because it's a blood vessel cancer, and so it's not the cancer killing them in the normal way. What happens is the tumor bursts and they bleed to death. Because I'm paranoid, though, he had surgery the next day, and then he had chemo for a couple of months. It wasn't to save him long term, though. It was to give him a last summer. He got sick in the February, and he died at the end of August, and he got spoiled effing rotten for those 6 months. Story number 42. I wouldn't say I was completely prepared for it, but the time my best friend died suddenly, I knew she wasn't feeling well. She had gone to the hospital, but they weren't very helpful, so a couple of days later, I was going to feed her livestock for her when I got off work because it was getting too difficult for her. She called me and left me a voicemail asking if I could tend to the indoor pets too, and she was going back to the hospital. I called her back and left a voicemail not to worry, I'll get everyone taken care of. So then I got a Facebook message from someone claiming to be her neighbor, asking if I was the one coming to tend to the animals. When I confirmed, she said it was imperative that I stop at her place first. Y'all, I lost my crap. The rest of my shift, I was panicking back and forth, babbling incoherently that she died, and there was no other explanation for why it's imperative to check in with the neighbor. So my boyfriend drives me out there because I am just in a state, full-on panic attack. I get to the neighbor's place, and they hop in the car and ask how close I am to my friend. I respond with, very, and at this point, things are spinning and I'm nauseous. My heart is dropped as I feel this is confirmation of my fear, and that's when the bomb drops. The neighbor tells me that she died before returning to the hospital and explains everything, and I'm just in shock and disbelief. We all go over and tend to the animals together. That was a really tough time for me. Unfortunately, my brain took that whole experience to mean that every anxiety-induced or intrusive thought was completely unreasonable. It takes me a long time to reason through unreasonable thoughts. It's been a long time now, but still to this day, if I'm expecting someone and they are late, I'm utterly convinced that they were in a horrible accident and are dead in a ditch. I get completely irrational, and it overrides anything reasonable. Even if the person is texting me updates, my brain just rejects that info and still thinks that they are obviously dead. Anywho, just add it to the list of things anxiety makes me do. Story number 43. March last year, I called my surgery together for a meeting. I explained I felt we were at extreme risk of COVID as our job involved being covered in body fluids. I'd already stocked up on N95 and other PPE a month earlier and watched as colleagues were unable to work due to a worldwide shortage. I told my staff that I hadn't had a holiday for 2 years and was going to take the next month off to prepare, and suggested to anyone else take the time off if they wish. I showed my Indian nurse how to disconnect our oxygen supply and told her to take it home if required rather than try and attempt to seek help at the hospital. My daughter was in the final year of high school and asked me what were my thoughts. I told her I expect the country to lock down for 6 weeks to control the outbreaks. Then, once managed, they will lock down smaller centers, such as towns or even suburbs, by limiting movement from further outbreaks until every case could be identified and tracked. I told her her exams will be fine and to prepare for university to start on time. 14 months later, my staff do not question anything I say and are grateful to be working full-time in an otherwise normal situation. My daughter was accepted into university on a full scholarship after achieving full marks. Story number 44. During April to May, I used to stress about being fired from my job, I'm an editor, because working from home had a noticeable effect on the quality of my final videos. I used to take my dog on walks around the neighborhood and think about how long my wife and I could make it on our savings if I got fired today or next week. Work had gotten lighter and editing tasks had dried up, so I got more paranoid. I thought maybe they were prepping to hand my tasks to other editors on the team. Then one Monday morning, I had a Zoom call from my boss telling me that I was being furloughed indefinitely. I had come to see that the workplace was pretty toxic in nature, so I was almost relieved since this meant I didn't have to stress about every word I say to my boss. And then, we took a week-long trip to Yellowstone a couple of weeks later with little to no planning, and it went great. Couldn't have done that with a 9 to 5 that I would have had to ask off for. Story number 45. So, this is an interesting one. One day when I was 16 or so, my mom and I are outside gardening. A family friend's daughter, Jane, 30-ish I think, walks up and begins talking to my mom. She lived fairly close, but far enough away that it was a good 15 to 20-minute walk from our house. I'm not paying it any mind, but my mom comes up to me and says she's going for a walk with Jane and would be back in 15 minutes. I wouldn't have usually gave it any mind, but something about the way my mom looked, or maybe I had overheard the conversation or something, put me on edge for some reason. I decided to take my brother, grab the family car, and shadow my mom on her walk. About 4 blocks from my house, a cop car drives up and calmly walks over and starts talking to them. All of a sudden, Jane tries to run, and the cop has to hold her and calls an ambulance. Turns out, she had recently stopped taking her antipsychotic medication and was having an episode. My mom is running back home to grab her phone when she sees me, and I drive her home. And she calls Jane's dad, who was out searching for her because she disappeared. From what my mom said, the conversation she had with Jane was like a kid conversation. Not simplistic, but no back and forth, like when two kids are talking to each other about two completely different things. It was a weird experience, but taught me to trust my gut. Story number 46. OMG, my time has come. I was a bit of a loner, always on my laptop, had some people to talk to every now and then, but kept to myself mostly. I've had some issues with the school IT by getting into some loopholes in the system, but nothing serious like hacking, and I barely knew how to code. In high school, a chick with mental issues had sent an email out to all of the teachers in the school that she was going to self-unalive. Apparently, she didn't send it through and said she'd been hacked and someone else had sent it. The whole year group went berserk over wondering who it was. But when I spoke to the chick after the incident had happened, she gave me no eye contact and ignored me every time, which was really odd. So I overthinked the crap out of thinking she was blaming me for hacking into her computer. And then lo and behold, 1 week later, the deputy principal calls me into his office and asks me about the incident at hand. And it was so hard not to smile because I was 100% innocent. They asked me where I was when it happened, and funnily enough, I was getting math help with a teacher. I had asked him if the chick reported me, but he said no, which sounded like bullcrap, but my IT teacher did. The last combo I had with him was when I coincidentally asked him if you can hack someone's laptop using an IP address after the incident happened. I know there's some amazing hackers out there, but I can't imagine myself, a school kid, hacking from a Windows laptop through the school internet onto an Apple Mac laptop, because I know for a fact that Apple's code is entirely different to Windows, so it would be some hard stuff to do. Story number 47. My ex-girlfriend was cheating on me. She denied it, but I knew pretty early on. My family booked a holiday and she was invited as well. We broke up before we went, and this was the last thing that triggered my depression. Anyway, so we go on that holiday like almost 1,000 kilometers away from home, trying to forget the entire situation. As we are settled into the holiday home, my overthinking and anxiety at the time kept saying, but what if I run into any of the two here? This is obviously very unlikely, but me being me, this seemed like a very real thing. Well, day 2 rolls on in, and we go to the supermarket, and lo and behold, I see a dude that looks oddly familiar. Nah, it can't be, but we're so far away from home. And after surviving that panic attack, we get back home, and I sit out on the porch. I hear my native language in the house next to us, and I'm like, what? And there is the dude again, and panic intensifies. But I try to rationalize. It can't be him, right? And then I hear one of the other dudes yell his name, and he responds. I really wish I made this up, but from that point on, when people talk to me about low odds or coincidences, I will forever have this in the back of my mind. It's been over 5 years now, and everything is fine with me. Depression under control, new girlfriend for almost 3 years, and I am happy. Story number 48. When my wife and I were preparing to get married, we needed to book a banquet, including the hall and dining, and my father was with us, and in the end, we chose a place that is quite secluded, which unlike other places in Hong Kong, requiring us to pay for 90% of the banquet in advance, this being done in monthly payments. And then my father questioned this a bit and jokingly said that, what if they go bankrupt? And the staff said they are a very well-known club in Hong Kong. And how could they go bankrupt? And my father said, as big as Lehman Brothers can go bankrupt, so why not? And fast forward half a year later, that we already paid for more than half the payment in advance, they indeed go bankrupt. Well, there's no way we can prepare for this. And if according to common practice of bankruptcy, we wouldn't be getting a dime back, as there are more important people ahead of the queue, so to speak, to get their money back. But since the founder of that club doesn't agree with that discussion, and he personally arranged us to get back all of the money from a law firm within a few days. That's a roller coaster ride, and we are very thankful that we can get the money back. If not, we would be broke, by the way, and can't hold a wedding banquet, and we still need to find another place. It was then half a year prior to our wedding, and in Hong Kong, people normally need to book for that in advance for at least a year. Thankfully, we can find one that still has an opening, partially because we're Christian, and so our wedding date is not a fortunate date. You see, in Chinese culture, people superstitiously assign dates to be good and bad for certain activities, including weddings. So a fortunate date for weddings normally are fully booked like at least a year or 2 in advance. Everything went smooth for our wedding, but a few years later when we visited Hong Kong again and went to revisit that place, they were closed already. I guess it is not a rarity for a restaurant to close business from time to time. Story number 49. So I took a bailiff to court for violent assault. Before the court date, I received a call from the arrest officer suggesting I drop the case as I would be unlikely to win. Well, that was odd because he was the one advising me to take the bailiff to court in the first place. I had CCTV camera evidence of the assault and one eyewitness. So I was thinking of any possible scenario where he would change his view. The bailiff was an officer of the court, so maybe knew some of the police, and the police are just one big boys club after all, and I started recording my calls in case this officer called me again. Then, sure enough, I got a call from another police officer, and he was extremely direct. He told me there was no possible way I could win this case as the bailiff was employed by the courts, and also mentioned a several-decade-old offense of mine and how it would get brought up in court. He said he would make me regret ever taking this to court. So I told him that the call was recorded, because it was, and then he yelled at me, "You effing twat," and cut the call off. So in court, almost the first thing to happen was this guy stood up and announced he was the chief police commissioner, and that the bailiff was his son-in-law, and that he was calm and a reasonable man. So that explained everything. Well, it appears that the bailiff had made up this long story about how I had goaded him into attacking me. So we played the video of the whole event, and the judges only needed to see it once. The judges awarded me with their judgment and compensation, and the guy lost his license. Then we played the audio of the police phone threat. In the following months, the commissioner was found to have tried influencing a few different court cases, so I'm guessing his officers rolled on him. He was sacked in disgrace. They didn't even allow him to leave quietly. Story number 50. So, I am an exam monitor, and last year, 48 students are in an amphitheater. They are massively disorganized. Didn't bother to read the email, but anyway, I got this. I carry large amounts of spare pens, pencils, erasers, pencil sharpeners for the students. They sign the presence sheet and get told to get to a numbered seat. The map is projected on the big screen, and they don't know what to do to fill out their name, and etc. on the form. And seriously, they're master's students? Well, I got this, and project the procedure with diagrams, big black arrows and soundtracks of me reading the instructions, and I keep the teaching assistants rotating around the students' seating to check everything in real time. And then the CD player crapped out mid-soundtrack? Well, I got this, because I carry an external CD player and powerful mini loudspeakers to play it via my portable PC. Then the teaching assistant screwed up and nearly let them walk out of the amphitheater with the test booklets? Holy crap, that's a 20,000 euro fine for me if that happens. By this time, I was paranoid and keeping an eye on everything. I ran to cover the screw up, intercepted the unattended stack of booklets just in time. By that time, I'd used up so much energy I didn't even care when many of the students walked off with my spare pencils. But the exam stayed within the boundaries of its rules because I had over-prepped massively. It was an exhausting win, but still a win. Story number 51. COVID. 2 years ago, from December 2019 to January 2020, when cases had only just begun hitting China, I recalled the SARS crisis of my childhood in Singapore, also precipitated by a mysterious, incurable virus emerging from China. I remembered robot sanitizers everywhere, centralized household distributions of provisions and medical supplies, temperature checks before entering public places, 3rd to 4th degree contact tracing of SARS victims, and so on. And I knew none of these would take place in an organized, non-shambolic fashion early on, or ever in the UK. So I noped it out of the UK immediately, and just as I predicted, the UK under Bojo completely failed to handle it, leading to mass deaths. Although its vaccination program at the end was a saving grace. Asian cities, Singapore, Tokyo, Seoul, Taipei, HK, are a good place to be for cleanliness, efficiency, and safety. And as for fun and normalcy during the pandemic, everything mostly carried on as per normal. For perspective, Singapore, Taiwan, and New Zealand have about 0.5 deaths per 100k people. South Korea has about 4 deaths per 100k people. Japan has about 8 deaths per 100k people, and the UK and USA have about 200 deaths per 100k people. Story number 52. I was drunk as a skunk, but I hope this still counts as overthinking. So, I was at an after party at a friend's place with him and a couple of women I know, one of which I had been fooling around with at the time, and the space for after parties and TV watching had this short stairs that went down from the side near the TV, and the area in front of the TV was the only real space for dancing. So, the girl I had a keen interest in very much liked to dance. In particular, in front of me. But I kept getting distracted thinking about and visualizing what I needed to do if she danced backwards and onto those steps. Because you see, I also wanted to believe she was aware enough to know where the steps were, and nobody wanted to be treated as a kid. At least, that's what I thought at the time. So, long story short, one of her feet suddenly found no more floor, and she started to tip backwards. And since I was mentally prepared, my body sprang across the 2 to 3 meters to her and caught her at a 30-degree angle with my arm resting on my knee and my hand holding her neck and shoulders in a very Cinderella romantic pose. All this before I even had the time to think. Now, on the reasons why I think about safety security, that's a whole other story. But Minecraft and lava is involved. Story number 53. So, I'm a mountain biker, and in doing so, I scrape up my body pretty bad. A lot. As a result, I have a makeshift first aid kit in my camelback, a sort of backpack that holds water connected to a tube so you can use it to drink without stopping. And I use it whenever I fall or generally just need to patch myself up or when I can't get off the trails quickly. Anyway, one time I'm riding the loop around my local greenway. It's around 4 miles and I'm casually biking, and I still have my camelback though since it's really hilly and a pain to try to start on again. I'm mostly through it and I'm at a part where the trail crosses over a large river. Then half a mile later, back down it. At one point, there's a wide deer trail that you can use to get to the riverbed. At this point, I'm tired and I take a break to check the time, and I walk down to the river as I normally do. It's calm and I really like sitting by it. But this time, when I walk down, I hear someone huffing and making that noise when you suck air between your teeth. Basically, it sounded like they were in pain. I followed the noise, calling out to whoever it was, and I was saying something along the lines of, "Hello? Call out to me, I have a first aid kit, I can help." And after a few seconds, they call out and say, "I'm over here by the river, please hurry." And I run to them to see what was wrong, and when I get there was a kid sitting on a rock. We can call him Jacob, and he was probably around 15 or so. He was leaning over his leg and holding it tightly. As I walk over, he lifts his hands to show me what it is. He had 2 small puncture wounds side by side with the skin around them puffy and red. A snake bite. Where I live, we have cottonmouths, and I've seen quite a few personally. I don't know what snake did this, but I was terrified. I didn't know how to help, but I had to try something. And I said, okay, I have some stuff. I don't know if it'll help, but you need to work with me on this, okay? And then Jacob nodded his head. As I pulled out a spare water bottle, I walked him through what I'm going to do. Okay, so first things first, what did the snake look like? And he says, it was orangish and it kind of had these darker stripes on its backs. Now, I'm not the best with snakes, but it sounded like a rat snake. I told him that they aren't poisonous, but I'm going to call 911 to try to get some paramedics over. We weren't far from a hospital, and we were literally in the woods behind it, so after the phone call, it should only be a few minutes until they get here. Then I talked Jacob through what I'm about to do. I gave him the water bottle and a single Benadryl. Once he swallowed that, I took the bottle and started washing off his wound. He started crying, saying that it hurt like hell. I tried to comfort him, saying that the paramedics will be here soon. I took a roll of gauze and started wrapping it tightly around the wound. Once it was all dressed, I told him what to do and said, okay, so I think it's only a rat snake like I told you, but I can't be certain. If it was venomous, there is venom in your bloodstream right now, so you can't let it get to your heart. So what you need to do is sit down and try to calm down. Take some deep breaths. The Benadryl will help. I'm going to help you up onto the main trail and we will find a bench, and I'll wait with you until help arrives. And once he was settled, I got him talking about himself, about anything. I was trying to get his mind off the snake bite. I learned that he had been coming down to the river for the past month or so. He apparently had been studying the life cycle of a species of frogs for a science project. He was a sophomore in high school. He had a golden noodle named Danny, and he had a younger sister. Once he was done talking, he had calmed down a lot. He said he was feeling a lot better and how he owes a lot to me. I just told him that I would feel like crap if I didn't help. We sat in silence and just watched people pass by for the next few minutes until the paramedics arrived. They checked out the wound and agreed that it was a rat snake from Jacob's description. They took off the gauze and rewrapped it with a new layer. They thanked me for helping and walked him back to the entrance, presumably to get the bite checked on by a doctor. I'm sorry that this was so long, but I've just wanted to put this story somewhere, and this seemed like the best spot to do so. This may not fit into overthinking, but I definitely overprepared. I don't know how Jacob is. All I saw of him was that day. Again, sorry if this was a bit traumatic. I just felt like a hero for weeks after it. I hope you enjoyed my story. Story number 54. I am always carrying a bunch of stuff in my backpack. It could be pills, a Ziploc bag of tissue, a tote bag, an oversized thick plastic bag, Band-Aids, masking tape, small measuring tape, a single shoelace I found on the ground. Not kidding, I always told myself it could be useful, and a cleaning rag. I've started doing this in secondary school, then college, then adult life. Same backpack too, I've been carrying it for 13 years, and I take care of my stuff. But why does one need a cleaning rag in his bag? Because you never know, that's why. Well, one time we were doing a team project in college. My friend spilled her coffee on the table, and it was a matter of time before our documents were soaked. Then lo and behold, me, the guy always ready for everything, pulls out a rag and saved the day. A few weeks prior to that event, still in college, I arrive early to my class, like always, and suddenly one guy who's usually always late came early, dropped his bag and rushed out since he needed to get his project from the computer at the other end of the building, because he didn't do it the night before. I guess he liked being late. However, we had a policy: keep the room clean. No dirt of melted snow on the floor. We are in Quebec, Canada, and there was snow outside, so our boots got all dirty and leave water on the floor. And there are folks who don't wear boots and switch to shoes inside. Instead, they just wear shoes and make the place dirty. So the guy was rushing and saw the mess that he left on the ground in panic, and he had to get his project on his drive, plus wipe the floor before the teacher arrived in the class. So you know what happens next? I pull out my trusty little rag and wipe the floor clean, saving this guy's fate. Continuing, why does one need small measuring tape in his bag? Because you never know. We had an evaluation in one of my classes in college, and we had to reproduce a shoebox, a real one we had in the class, and animate it in C4D in a matter of time. Most people just eyeball it, make a rectangular box, and call it a day. I cannot simply do some random shape. It said reproduction. I needed the measurements. We were post-production students, not the kind of folks who carry the means to measure objects in their daily lives, except for me, of course, because I'm the weird one, always ready for everything. So I pulled out my measuring tape at the start of the class before people arrived. Except for the teacher, he was always early, and proceeded to get the right measurement from the physical box, and thus got a perfect shape for my CG shoebox. 96% on that evaluation, way higher than most people. Then, winter coat. It's necessary if you live in Canada. A few years ago, I got myself one with loads of pockets. I love pockets. You can store all sorts of things in there. A Ziploc bag full of tissues, a reflecting high-visibility bracer, spare coins if you need to take the bus and got no cards, or no spare change in your pocket, and what about a spare set of gloves? Well, I already had a pair of gloves. Why not two? Because you never know. So, still in college, we are doing a project where we first needed to film some good-looking shots during the night. because we needed night lights on buildings and such. So it's a winter night, a beautiful one too, with thick, slow falling snow and frigid air. However, one guy in our team didn't prep us as well as we thought, and he forgot to bring gloves, and we kinda needed fingers to operate a DSLR. So you know the drill, they know the drill. Surprise, secondary pair of gloves directly from yours truly. Saved him from demise of frozen fingers. Then, congratulations, you have been invited to a party in a shack resort. Friends and friendly coworkers will be making a potluck. I hate food waste. I grew up in the countryside and was frugal before I even knew it was a thing. If a group of adults in their late 20s will make a potluck, surely there will be leftovers. I always keep some plastic container, basic one that you can buy at the dollar store that I actually got from margarine containers that I cleaned because it's the exact same model. It sits in my cupboard waiting to get used. I brought 5 of them at the party. And why, you ask? Because you never know. The potluck was sort of fun, but inebriated cooking and inebriated planning before the cooking leads to questionable results. Leftovers happened more than they thought, and I hate wasting food. And the friend who organized the party, what a great guy, also stated to avoid wasting food as much as possible. But alas, it happened. No one had containers for leftovers, except for good ol' me, who gave my cheap container to save the day and the food. I also brought spare reusable shopping bags at the party. I was a part of the cleaning team. Lots of stuff was left by the others. Lots of stuff was brought at my place thanks to those bags. And I mean, there was a whole barely opened can of maple syrup. That stuff is expensive. I just wrapped it up in saran wrap and put a rubber band on it that I had in my bag, you guessed it, and it was sealed. I put a beer bottle box at the bottom of my bag so it could sit upright. Then, COVID happened. We were all sent home. Fear settles in and there's no food at the grocery store because people bought everything for the confinement. And guess who had loads of canned food way before March 2020? The neighbor? The old cat lady down the street? Elvis Presley on his island? No, me. And why would I have loads of canned food in my cupboard? Because you never know. I'm always ready for every eventuality. Friends learned it with time, and I like making fun of myself for this. I think it's ridiculous sometimes, but if I'm not prepared, I've always had bad feelings. Overthinking made me win more than it has made me lose, and that's a fact. So, it's taken this story for me to realize that in some way, there's a bit of overlap between some of these, like, I have everything I need type of over-prepared people and hoarders, because some of this stuff you might have for a decade and never even use it. My point being that I suppose that some of the people that we've read about in this video are more effective hoarders, I guess? Mobile hoarders? One category, though, keeps it in their home for a decade hoping that they'll use it, and then the other keeps it in their backpack or the trunk of their car for a decade hoping that they'll use it, and you probably have a higher chance of using said item if you're the latter of the two, because you're out in the world, and maybe someone else needs it if you're generous. But anyway, next story. Story number 55. In the beginning of this year, I got promoted to a position where I am responsible for the safety at my place of work, a regular office, and I started looking through the rules and regulations and found that some of the supervisors hadn't gone through a first aid CPR course in the last 2 years, including myself. At 26, I am the oldest of all the supervisors, so you can imagine that neither of us had much experience with emergencies. My boss booked us a course for the end of March that took us through first aid, CPR, and general emergency psychology. I've always been a bit of a hypochondriac and regularly scour the Ask Reddit threads directed at medical and emergency personnel, and I asked a bunch of questions about hypothetical scenarios and requested anecdotes during the course. Well, 2 weeks ago, a colleague with no previous history had an epileptic seizure while on the phone with a customer. As soon as I received the call, I went there and was able to manage the situation, sending well-meaning fussing coworkers to the next room, put a jacket under my colleague's head, and just sat next to him while the seizure passed. Gave a report to the ambulance personnel, and then had a talk with every single coworker about the situation and their feelings about what happened. Some needed to cry about it, some vented, others wanted to know what they could do in the future, etc. We had a very good exchange about this, and we all kind of felt like a big family at the end of it. So, thanks to all the people who have shared your stories of emergencies on social media like Reddit. Your first-hand accounts have helped me imagine countless scenarios and helped me act when something really happened. Story number 56. Oh geez, well you know how 2020 was the crap year for everybody? Yeah, I'm no exception. So, late 2019, things are going great. I have a beautiful girlfriend, she has a precious son, and we are trying for another. Inspired by my recent promotions and newfound financial security, we were looking at homes, shopping for schools, just living the dream, with one caveat. I am an overthinker. And I have had problems with jealousy in the past, so every time it came up that I was feeling jealous with my new love, interacting with, and generally doing normal parenting stuff with her boy's biological father, I very firmly told myself how absolutely ludicrous. It could never happen. Don't let this irrational thinking go on. So I I would bring it up during the times where it was really bothering me, and I made sure to be clear in communicating that I didn't have a problem with him and her interacting. It was just a twinge of pain from past relationships that I had moved on from. She was very reassuring and understanding. Around this time, we became pregnant and I was elated. She was not as enthusiastic given that we hadn't found a place to live yet, and I had recently purchased a Camaro thinking we'd have plenty of time to prepare. We confidently went to our first appointment and discovered we were indeed pregnant. Christmas comes around and my father received the gift of learning that he'd been a grandfather again in about 8 months from then, and it was around this time, the days after Christmas, I had to cope with a little twinge of jealousy. I told my girlfriend I was just a little bit sad that she only got Christmas evening with me but got Christmas morning and New Year's with him. I expressed that I really wanted to spend New Year's with her, and she pretty firmly shot me down, almost like she knew I was going to propose and didn't want me to. The day before New Year's, she told me some horrible news. She was bleeding a bit and didn't feel right in her tummy, and I asked her if I could take her to the doctor and she said no, just watch her son while she went on her own. I figured that was acceptable. Then from 9 a.m. until 7 p.m., I didn't hear anything from her, and it should have just been a short appointment, blood work at most. She finally called me and said she was on her way to pick up her son and that she was miscarrying and that the doctor told her it was caused by our aggressive intercourse. So, right off the bat, overthinking me is wondering about everything she just said. She's not crying, she's simply just driving over to pick up her son. She arrives, and pretty much exactly that happens. Inside, I was dying on the verge of tears from the moment I saw her until the moment she spoke the first words that gave me doubt. I told you we should have been more careful. That is not a sentence she had ever spoken to me concerning the health of our unborn baby. In fact, she was quite persistent and passionate. We hugged, kissed goodbye, and she left me alone with my thoughts to churn. The next day, without any provocation on New Year's, she says that she needs some space and time to process. By this point, I have already overthought every scenario and resigned to my room ready to deal with the anxiety and unknowingness that comes from I need space. I totally accepted her desire for space, but I didn't understand it. I came to know her as someone who needs a strong and confident partner to confide in, because she herself wants to be strong, but isn't confident. We were such a strong team because she was fiery and passionate on the outside, but timid on the inside. And I was timid on the outside and fiery on the inside. One of the things that continuously churned around in my mind for the first weeks of January 2020 was her saying that the doctor blamed her aggressive intercourse for her unborn baby dying. And that just stuck out to me as biologically improbable. Sure enough, after a quick search, it's exceedingly rare for any complications to arise from intercourse of any intensity, aside from breaching the cervix and tearing it, which would be exceedingly painful for both parties. There's really not much damage you can do. So, as every tragedy goes, she inevitably decided to leave me with, I thought it was clear we were broken up. I'm going to stay single for a long time. My son is my first priority. You're a great guy. And I let it go. I've got too much experience in this life to flip out and lose emotional control anymore, but I let it go on the healthiest way I know how. I gathered the last of her belongings, sent her a text message saying your stuff is here, and in 1 month it will be abandoned and you may see me trying to sell it. I have time this weekend for you to pick it up if you wish. And I didn't receive a response. 30 days later in February, with thoughts still churning about whether she got an abortion, was I that horrible? Faked the miscarriage? Did she cheat? Never got pregnant? Is she psycho? I pushed that all to the back of my mind and began posting the items of clothing, shoes, makeup, and the Apple Watch that she had left behind. The watch needed a charger, but a trip to Walmart solved that, and immediately upon charging the device, it connected to my Wi-Fi, and a string of text messages between her and her ex popped up. So I read them, and essentially learned that they were back together. No surprise there, I've been lied to so many times. I'm surprised when I find out the truth, to be honest. And what I saw when I scrolled down was a bit more surprising. An email from her doctor saying she's soon entering her second trimester with no complications. I even got to see the ultrasounds. I texted her and said, do you have a due date? I'd like my lawyer to have a time frame for when we can start the process of establishing paternity. And my lawyer advised me not to attempt communication again after that. She never responded. She skipped state, sold her car, lives in a big house with her now husband and 2 sons. A much less mature and stable version of me would have compiled this whole crap scenario into a few new criminal charges. But be aware, overthinkers, that your emotions will be your downfall if you let them. I have a chance to know who my son is and be a part of his life because of my emotional control. Had I went through this a few years prior, I likely would have snapped and lost any chance to know my son. Stability. Learn it. Know it, practice it every day. Story number 57. It all began in the winter of 2018. My mother is aging and I'm always looking for ways to make life a little more comfortable and convenient for her. I've decided to buy her a bidet toilet seat, and she took a bad fall and broke her arm a few years prior, and it was becoming more difficult to wipe after going to the bathroom. So I head to Costco, which is a large American warehouse store, and I buy the bidet and head home to install it as a surprise. Unfortunately, the bidet needs to be plugged in. It has a nightlight, heated seat, water heater, drying fan, and a remote control, and there was no electrical outlet within reach of the power cord. So instead of returning the fancy $300+ bidet and replacing it with a regular one that doesn't require power, I decided to add an electrical outlet at a convenient location on the wall behind her toilet. Well, when you give a mouse a cookie, the only way to install an outlet at that location is to go through the wall to my bathroom on the other side of the wall. This required me to remove my bathroom mirror since I had to run wiring through the wall to my light switch. When I removed the mirror, the little metal strip that holds the mirror in place on top of the backsplash got damaged. The backsplash was the same material as the countertop, ugly yellowish color, which was apparently all the rage back in the 1970s when the house was built. So then I decided I may as well replace the backsplash and countertop. This turned into an entire bathroom remodel, and I buy all the stuff I need, replacing the sink, faucet, water pipes, countertop, backsplash, and drywall. While I'm at Home Depot, I decide to buy additional electrical components to add an outlet to my bathroom as well. Since I already had the wall open, why not? And I add the electrical components, install the new sink and countertops, and repair the drywall. Thank goodness you can find out how to do all of these projects on YouTube. And this entire project took me about a year to complete. So now it's February of 2020 and my bathroom is looking pretty good. But I still needed to replace my toilet because it looked old and everything else was new. I head to Costco and buy a replacement toilet. Next to the toilets are the very same bidets, and now they're on sale. I decided to treat myself and buy another one for my bathroom. After all, I had a power source. At that time, I had a full-time job and a life, so I didn't get around to installing the bidet in my bathroom until the second week of March. No less than a week later, it's announced that we are going into COVID lockdown, and there's a run on toilet paper. I was due to buy my normal allotment, and I couldn't find any anywhere. What were these savages thinking? Why toilet paper of all things? Since I couldn't find toilet paper, I decided to buy a tremendous amount of alcohol. I figured if the world as I knew it was coming to an end, I could barter alcohol for various goods, like toilet paper, and turns out I drank most of the booze over the last year. Anyway, I digress. Anyhow, it all worked out for my household. The bidets are awesome. My booty hole has never felt cleaner, and I don't ever use toilet paper unless I'm in too much of a hurry to let the drying fan of the bidet work its magic. I had never used a bidet before because I'm an American, and well, America. We drive big cars, shoot big guns, and if we choose to smear poop all over ourselves when we wipe, it's our God-given right. I am a convert, though, and I highly recommend getting a bidet. This is my first post, so I hope you enjoyed it. Story number 59. Went on vacation with my family, and for the first time in my life, it was a connecting flight. My dad had booked it all and only left us 30 minutes to catch our connecting flight. I told him I had a bad feeling about that, and he should try to move the flights around, but he refused. Now, I never pre-Google my flights as nothing of note would ever come up, but there I was Googling my flight, and turns out, for some reason, the top result was that this flight was almost always running 30 minutes late. I relay the info to my dad, who continues to dismiss me, and I think to myself, well, he used to travel a lot for work, he should know, right? Right? I still had a bad feeling and decided that it was probably the best thing to pack a change of clothes in my carry-on just in case, even though I never do. We get to our first stop, and lo and behold, our plane had taken off 30 minutes late, leaving us exactly 0 minutes to get to our connecting flight. Literally, as our wheels touched the tarmac, the other flight was locking its doors. After having to deal with the mess because my parents couldn't be bothered, I made the decision that we fly to another country to catch the next flight to our final destination. Fast forward, we finally get to our final destination, only to find out that all of our luggage was lost. Not a single one managed to get on our new connecting flights. Luckily for me, I had packed an extra set of clothes, so I was solid, but everyone was left scrambling to find clothes in a country we'd never been to before. During our 2-week trip, we didn't have our luggage for a week, and the cherry on top was on the way back, I packed bags and thought the chances of them losing our luggage again is slim, right? No. Let's pack anything that I know I want with me. Turns out, I called it. On the way back, despite making our flights on time, they lost our luggage again, and they weren't returned to us for almost 3 weeks. Trust your intuition and overthinking, folks. jokes. Story number 60. I know I'm really late to the game and this will probably get buried, but it's long, but worth the read. But anyway, I was a senior in high school and we all only had flip phones, and it still wasn't at a phase that everyone had phones yet. But my brother, 21, and his best friend, 23, always had their phones blowing up with calls. They partied a lot. I had also been dealing with a rare grand seizure disorder since I was a freshman in high school, and my parents had gotten me a cell phone really young for that reason. Now, a little backstory. Both of my older brothers and 3 of their best friends would check in with me multiple times a week when I was at school because they were used to me having a grand seizure at least once every 2 weeks. But they had started to happen once every 6 to 7 days, and no doctors had figured out how to stop them yet. So all 5 of those guys checked in on me religiously, and the school administration had approved them to sign me out for the day if I felt even mildly tense or faint. So, back to the overthinking. It was super common for people not to answer their cell phones in 2006. Not many people had them and they didn't ring that loud, and one night my brother's best friend was going to meet his new girlfriend at the bar where she worked, and around 10 p.m. he was supposed to meet at my parents' house with about 10 of us having a blockbuster movie night. He was never late, ever. Never late, ever. When midnight rolled around and he hadn't shown up and wasn't answering his cell phone, the bar phone kept ringing with no answer. I panicked. My entire family and friends were used to me being anxious and an overthinker 24/7, and I always assumed the worst case scenario. So I demanded my brothers and I drive to the bar. I couldn't drive because seizures, and they said, okay, if he's not answering by 1 a.m., we'll go. So 1 a.m. came and went, and we drove 30 minutes to the bar. And 1 mile away from the bar, we see headlights coming up from a ditch and another car sitting on the road without any damage. We pulled over immediately, and I just effing knew it. I knew it was him. But my brother said, no, he was going to call us when he left the bar. But he'd never made it to the bar. The couple who had been driving the car without any damage were screaming at each other and slurring their words horribly. They kept saying it was an accident to us over and over and begging us not to call the cops. I immediately said to my brothers, he's dead. They still insisted I was overthinking, and one of them grabbed a stick out of his car to try to balance himself down into this really deep ditch beside a lake. But I just effing knew it. I knew my overthinking was right. And I had made my brother carry roadside emergency auto and medical kits, and I threw the medical kit down into the ditch for my brother. And about 30 seconds later, I heard my brother screaming and puking. I jumped down and opened up the hyperventilation bag. He passed out, and the bag had smelling salts, and I woke him back up. I saw our friend and immediately started puking everywhere. Our best friend had gotten a flat tire 1 mile from the bar. He had his flashers on, and he had set out a flare and 2 of those portable flashing emergency cones while he was changing his tire. I'd also bought him the emergency auto and medical kits for Christmas, and he said I was crazy paranoid, but here he was using it in all the right ways to protect himself. The couple in the other car were extremely drunk and had swerved and hit him at 60 miles per hour, and their reasons were so delayed that they fully ran him over after the cops said the impact of the hit had thrown him 1,100 feet. They measured blood and flesh stains on the asphalt. The drunk couple, they knew he was dead, so they rolled his car into the ditch and put his body back in his car, trying to make it look like he crashed. They told us this, but most cell phones didn't have video capability back then, so we couldn't record that confession. They bolted as soon as we called 911. However, I also made my brothers carry digital cameras in their cars, in case they needed to photograph a car for accidents or for insurance, and they were able to get a decent enough zoomed-in photo of the couple's license plate as they drove away. If I hadn't been overthinking, my brothers and our friends would have chalked this up to a no-show to the movie night, as just him going home with his girlfriend. We never would have had the license plate and the verbal confession from the couple to take to court. Unfortunately, they only got 4 months in jail and 6 months community service, which still makes my blood boil 15 years later. But at least I have the peace of knowing what truly happened versus having some unknown sketchy story. Story number 61. I, 27M, had always had an issue trusting men, especially men who are obviously attracted to my female friends. It's mostly due to a very traumatic upbringing and also knowing young men well enough not to trust them. One time, it actually worked out. One time, my friend group came into contact with this older guy in the church congregation a city away. We were all late teens, early 20s, and he was in his 30s and recently divorced. He was super charismatic and fun to be around, and most importantly, he would supply us alcohol who were underage. Looking back, I don't know why this was shocking, but I didn't trust him at all, and I regularly voiced that to all of my friends. Unfortunately, it was a very boy who called wolf situation because everyone thought I was just being mean and didn't like another guy coming into the friend group. This went on for a few months until one night he hosted hosted a gathering that I didn't end up going to. He got all of the young girls drunk that night, and he was the only male at the gathering. Thankfully, all of my girlfriends left the gathering, but one of our mutual friends stayed. She was a bit older and also not a very much mature person, so this isn't shocking. Anyways, as you might have guessed it, he got super touchy and inappropriate with the one girl who stayed, and we had to go pick her up before he assaulted her further. It was super sad, and after that, he continues to hold a place of status in the congregation after marrying a much older girl not even a year later. The only good part of this story is that by the time this happened, I had the sense not to say, "I told you so" to all my friends. Although later, someone was nice enough to acknowledge that I had said the whole time that I did not trust him. Story number 62. I have anxiety issues, but having my family prepared to leave the country when the 2011 Tohoku earthquake happened, it was only the paperwork portion. I was in the military, and my firstborn was 1, and I had a second along the way. So I was worried about something big happening and had all my affairs already in plan and had a plan B and C. When the earthquake happened and they were evacuating the installation, my family was the first in line because my will, vaccine records, next of kin, literally everything they had in the checklist and more I had already done and squared away in my preparation of an event. My ex was impressed. Little did she know that. I even had prepped food and water for like a month way before that, just in case we had to bunker down at the house. Plus, I had bug-out bags and other gear stored away in case we had to leave the house and move up the mountains. Maps, tents, matches, food, water, cash, and more. We were more than ready in case anything happened. Probably gonna do the same here in New York City. Story number 63. So, we owned a condo that had some issues with the mechanical heating system. We all had fan coils in our units that weren't doing well. There's a lot of details, but long story short, we decided to nope out of there because we were tired of dealing with the issues. We knew there was a big special assessment coming down the pipes. They told us $30K for units our size, and a flood for the year before had made our insurance premium and for the building go up and made the deductible for water $300K. And I did not want to wait around while the board hemmed and hawed about what to do about the fan coils that weren't functioning properly. So we listed a low price to account for the problems and risk, knowing well that we will lose about $100K. And I'm panicked the whole time because I can tell myself, and I'm thinking, OMG, we have to sell now because a fan coil will fail, the building is going to flood, the insurance deductible is so high that the cost is going to be a nightmare. Simultaneously trying to calm myself down because the board wasn't concerned because they were working on a fix. So we sold really fast, despite a slow market and all of the building issues because the unit looked amazing, and we made it a quick close. The time between closing and possession was complete torture thinking of all the things that could go wrong. The assessment could get levied early, and we'd be on the hook. The place could flood before my mech system got fixed, etc. One of the most stressful months of my life. Of course, at the same time, to some extent, worrying we were making a huge mistake by selling because we were losing so much money and the suite was amazing. God, I miss that kitchen in natural light. But we hand over the keys and move back into our tiny original condo. And 2 months later, a large pipe bursts on the top floor of the building and the whole thing floods on one side, including our former suite. Last we heard, they were looking at special assessments of less than $100K now to cover the floods, plus all the original stuff that had to be done. Needless to say, the whole experience completely reinforced my paranoid, everything that can go wrong will go wrong thinking. I'm just glad that we went with our gut and that things could always get worse. Story number 64. A few years after moving out of my childhood home, my stepfather hit me up asking for help because he had a hip surgery. Mind you, I moved out because of this man. However, at the time, I needed to get my GED and auto license, so I agreed under the condition that he both provide and pay for a way to acquire them. He agreed, and I moved along with my partner at the time. As soon as we got there, I had a funky feeling, so I hit up every single old friend I could think of, and I asked every single one of them that if things could go south, could we crash at their place? And I got a few yeses, and then worked my ass off bull rushing the completion of the GED and auto, all while leaving him to think we had nowhere else to go. Shortly after I acquired those, the house started to regain its familiar tension. It started out small, little comments and complaints about stuff. Then one day, him and my partner got into a fight. He yelled at her and I snapped. My memory is foggy, but it went about like this. He yells at her, I yell back, and then he says to me, "You don't yell at me in my house." And I say, "I don't give an F whose house we're in. You don't yell at her. Also, I'm the only one making money here and paying the mortgage. So whose house is this really?" And he says, "Get the F out now." And I say, "One step ahead of you, Chief." And I pull out my phone and call a friend and I say, "Hey, it happened like I thought it would. Can I come over at your place?" And let me tell you, his face as I hung up and started packing without a flinch was so damn good. They showed up, we openly trash-talked his ass while packing, and then left without a goodbye. If I never pre-planned this way, I would be homeless. I love my overthinking, anxiety-ridden brain. Story number 65. This will be buried and I'm not totally sure if it fits, but here goes. I was going to visit my then girlfriend at her school a few hours south of me. She had driven through my town and I was following her down. The highway we were on was more concrete than asphalt and my tires were making a funny sound on them. Oh, and we had walkie-talkies to chat while we drove. At some point, for some reason, and I still don't know why, a scene from the movie Changing Lanes popped into my head. Short version, Samuel L. Jackson in a taxi spins a tire iron next to Ben Affleck, who panics just as his wheel falls off his car. Anyway, that crap's on my mind and I grab my walkie-talkie to tell my girlfriend that my car is making a funny sound. She says it's probably the road and I shouldn't worry about it. I'm about to answer when out of the corner of my eye, I see my front driver's side wheel just roll off my car. It takes off across the median and time slows to a crawl. I was driving a 92 Ford Explorer and as the front corner of the car dipped down, what was left of the axle dug into the pavement and there was a shower of sparks so big I couldn't see out of my window. I stomped on the brakes and the pedal went all the way to the floor as my caliper had left with the wheel and all I could do was try and yank the steering wheel as hard as I could to try and coast into the shoulder. Oh, and I was screeching into the walkie-talkie all while this happened. Regardless, I don't know why that scene popped in my head, and I don't know if it helped me or not, except that the whole scenario was not nearly as surprising as it should have been. Story number 66. I don't know if this counts, but my last job was terrible, and I had the scenario play out in my head for a year that management would try to screw me. One day, the feeling became so intense that I went to our union about the situation. The harassment, false promises, blatant sexism, I'm a female in tech, threats, sabotage, union busting, etc. As I'm telling the union reps my concerns, management sends them an email stating that management, wants them, the union, to fire me. The rep is just astounded and states to me, "We're the union, we don't fire people, who are these people?" And, well, all that overthinking meant I had oodles of evidence. Even though they disabled my work email, the emails were still on my devices and I screenshotted them and the chats as well. And boy oh boy, they weren't happy about that. They tried to falsify my dismissal to unemployment. The unemployment rep was a turd, willing to try and ignore everything. I said, and I threw it in her face, "I have evidence that they are lying. Do you?" And the union stepped in with assistance from my doctor and neurologist to show how management had been lying. This is on top of the 6 months it took to get a correct record of employment. They actually sent me 3 incorrect records before unemployment, just took my word for the hours and pay for the last year. I've never heard of that happening, but all that overthinking had me ready for their bullcrap. And as a funny bit of an irony bonus, they refused to let me work from home as punishment for standing up for myself. And then 6 months later, COVID hit and they aren't allowed to work from the office. Story number 67. Serial killer incident. Maybe that I didn't fathom involved a possible murderer. I learned years later that he was suspected of killing several people using a similar modus operandi. He was a police officer whom I had previously seen and spoken to in town. While on duty, he asked if I was interested in learning how to shoot a gun because he asked me in front of his partner, in public, in front of the group I was walking with. I said yes, and never got any creepy vibes. I was familiar with the gun club shooting range location, and I knew where we were going to. When I told my friend about it, she didn't like anything about it. I was to meet him at a restaurant. Normally, I would have driven my separate car to any type of meetup destination. Since he was a law enforcement officer, after I arrived at the restaurant parking lot, I agreed to leave my car parked at the restaurant, which in hindsight kinda temporarily disappeared my car due to it being towed after we drove away in his truck, and I had somehow misplaced my phone, and as mentioned, he was a law enforcement officer, so I trusted him. My car wasn't equipped with GPS. We made it to the gun range and we did as others on the range were doing. I pretended to notice someone I knew and waved to a vague group. Nothing weird yet, other than my waving to nobody. On the ride back towards the town where my car had been parked, he started asking questions that caused me to be very concerned. Questions that caused chills. My blood ran cold when it appeared that his eyes turned black. I kept talking, lying perfectly, giving him answers that he wanted in a way that was believable. Also was trying to convince him that my location was known by whoever I had told about where I was going that afternoon. I didn't have a phone with me, but he didn't know that, so I adapted everything to be vaguely not phone dependent. All of this done to make him think an unknown number of people knew his name, etc. In reality, nobody knew his identity. All in all, I wanted him to believe that many knew where I was located, when technically 0 knew my current location. No phone meant that I had to convince him to not do anything but drive me to my car. It was the longest 30 minutes of my life, and upon seeing no car when we arrived, he drove me to my car that was inside the towing facility, and he paid for my car's release. I made it back home alive and told nobody about the incident, until a few years later after I learned that he was dead. So, I'm gonna be honest with you, and I've said it on this channel before, sometimes people are just not good storytellers, because I would have liked to hear more about the psychopath serial killer, but I guess not. Picking up from what we've read here, it seems like he takes these women, he has them alone, he asks them questions or something like that, but it would have been nice to hear more about it, or at least provide an article, I don't know. But anyway, OP's safe, the guy was dead for some reason, which he also didn't elaborate on. Man, why are people bad at stories? Have you ever had somebody tell you a story, and then you're really into it, and then they finish, and then you're like, what happened next? You shouldn't be asking that question. If you tell a story to somebody, and people are asking you what happens next, then you have failed to do your job, and you have done a social cliffhanger. You have cucked the climax, and I will not be a cuck. Not today. Not ever. I don't know. OP writes well, but she just didn't give all the details. But anyway, guys, we are at the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a really good day, and bye-bye!